My husband had been buried for less than 2 hours when my mother-in-law leaned close and whispered, "That house belongs to my family now." I was still holding the folded American flag against my chest. Arlington National Cemetery was quiet, except for wind in the trees and dress shoes moving softly over the grass. Colonel Daniel Harper, retired United States Army, my husband of 21 years, had been laid to rest with more dignity than most people receive in a lifetime. The honor guard folded the flag with such care that it seemed sacred. A young soldier placed it in my hands with both of his voice cracking slightly as he said, "On behalf of a grateful nation." I could only nod. Daniel would have hated a scene. He was the kind of man who washed his coffee mug before bed, shined his shoes years after retirement, and believed you could judge someone by how they treated waitresses and janitors. So when Eleanor Harper stepped beside me near the black funeral car, wearing pearls and no tears, I did not turn away. She looked at the flag like a receipt. "Margaret, we need to be practical now." I thought she meant the casseroles, the bills, or the relatives coming from Richmond. Then she moved closer. "That house belongs to my family now. So does the business. Daniel would have wanted his bloodline protected." I stared at a loose button on her navy coat, one thread hanging from it. Behind her, Daniel's army friends spoke quietly while my sister Ruth helped load flowers into a car. No one else heard her. I could have shouted that I was Daniel's wife, not a guest in his life, and that the Fairfax house held memories she had never bothered to make. Instead, I tightened my hold on the flag and said, "Not today, Eleanor." She smiled as though my restraint proved I was weak. That evening, the house felt enormous. Daniel's reading glasses still lay beside his recliner, and his half-finished crossword sat on the kitchen table beside a cold cup of coffee I could not pour away. At 7:15, my attorney, Michael Ross, arrived with a leather folder and a worried expression. "Margaret, Eleanor has already contacted probate counsel." I gave one dry laugh. "Of course she had." Michael opened the folder. "You have every right to fight. The house, Harper Precision, the estate accounts, none of it is simple, but you are not powerless." I looked at Daniel's empty chair. "Let her have it." Michael blinked twice and stared at me. "Grief makes people do strange things. We can wait before making decisions." "I have already made one." "You want to surrender everything?" "I did not say surrender." "Then what are you saying?" I looked toward Daniel's leather recliner, still facing the muted television. "I do not want to fight the way Eleanor wants me to." Michael closed the folder slowly. "I have handled probate cases for 24 years. I have never seen anyone this calm after losing a husband and facing a family lawsuit. I do not feel calm." The moment he left, I knelt in Daniel's closet, pressed one of his old army jackets to my face, and cried until my knees hurt against the hardwood floor. There was nothing strategic about those tears. I simply missed my husband. The next Sunday, I attended First Baptist Church in Fairfax, alone, for the first time in more than 20 years. Daniel always insisted we arrive 15 minutes early. "Running late is disrespectful," he would say while grabbing his truck keys. That morning I parked by myself. People meant well, but it still hurt. Mrs. Collins hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe and said she prayed for me every day. I thanked her. Then came the whispers. Eleanor had hired a lawyer. Was she taking the company? Was I really giving her the house? Gossip traveled quickly, even in Northern Virginia. I smiled and kept walking. After the service, Daniel's oldest army friend caught me in the parking lot. Frank Donovan had served with him for almost 18 years. He was 6'3", built like an oak tree, and still wore his veteran cap everywhere. "Margaret, are you going to tell me what is happening?" I wish I knew. He looked straight at me. Dan would have fought. I smiled faintly. No. He would have prepared. Frank considered that, then nodded. "I suppose you are right." Eleanor wasted no time. 3 days later, she invited half the Harper family to lunch at the Old Brogue Irish pub. By dinner, everyone had heard her version. Margaret knew she could not win. Margaret was finally doing the decent thing. Her son had built the company, and it belonged with his family. Apparently, after 21 years of marriage, I no longer counted as family. Even cousins I had not seen in years felt entitled to discuss my future. One afternoon, my neighbor Linda brought over a peach cobbler. "You do not have to answer, but are you okay?" I laughed softly. "No." She squeezed my hand. I did not think so. We stood in the kitchen without talking. Sometimes silence is kinder than advice. A week later, Michael called. The first probate conference would be the following Tuesday. "If you still plan to let Eleanor take everything, I need to know before we enter that courtroom." I looked toward Daniel's dark workshop, where his toolbox sat exactly as he had left it. "I have not changed my mind," Michael sighed. "I hope your husband left you something more than courage." After the call, I whispered to the empty kitchen, "So do I." In truth, I was far less certain than anyone believed. Every night, I wondered whether I was honoring Daniel or making the greatest mistake of my life. By October, people had stopped asking whether I would fight Eleanor. They had decided I would not. The story followed me through Fairfax. At the giant grocery store, or CVS, someone would tilt their head and tell me how sorry they were, how they could not imagine what I was facing, and how I had already endured enough. I thanked them. None knew the whole story, neither did I. One Monday, Michael drove me to Harper Precision Manufacturing in Alexandria. After Daniel retired from the Army, he asked me to stay involved, handling payroll and employee benefits while he ran the shop. The company was not glamorous. We did not build tanks or missiles. We repaired precision hydraulic systems for fire departments, rescue crews, utility companies, and several federal contractors. Daniel often said there was more honor in fixing equipment that saved lives than in making headlines. The familiar smell of machine oil and fresh coffee surrounded me as soon as we entered. Rick Coleman, the production manager, hurried over. "Mrs. Harper, you can still call me Margaret." He smiled weakly. "Is it true? Eleanor says she is taking over." Employees nearby stopped pretending not to listen. I took a breath. "The probate case is still ongoing." Rick hesitated. "Are our jobs safe?" That hurt more than anything Eleanor had said. These were not just employees. Many had worked with Daniel for 20 years. Some were veterans. Others were children of people who had worked there before them. Their mortgages, retirement plans, and children's tuition depended on this place. "I honestly do not know yet," I admitted. It was not the answer they wanted, but it was the only honest one. Later, Rick led me through the machine shop and stopped beside an old CNC milling machine. "Remember when Colonel Harper bought this?" I did. Daniel had driven to Ohio to inspect it himself. Rick laughed. "He spent 6 hours arguing over $15,000. Daniel loved negotiating. He was not cheap. He just hated wasting money. For the first time in weeks, I laughed for real. When I returned home, Eleanor's SUV was parked across the street. She stood with a real estate agent, pointing at my driveway, porch, and the flower beds Daniel had planted after retirement. I drove into the garage without speaking. Minutes later, Linda knocked. "You saw them?" "I did." She rolled her eyes. "Eleanor told the realtor she would remodel your kitchen before Christmas." I smiled despite myself. She planned that quickly. Linda stared at me. "You do not seem angry." "I am angry." "Then why are you not stopping her?" I looked toward Daniel's workshop, because that is exactly what everyone expects me to do. Instead, every evening after dinner, I unlocked the workshop and sat at Daniel's old workbench. I was not going there to cry anymore. I began organizing his military journals, maintenance logs, business binders, tax folders, and legal envelopes. Daniel labeled everything. An Army habit he never lost. One binder held service records. Another contained supplier contracts going back nearly 15 years. I was not hunting for anything specific. I wanted to understand the life we had built. Some nights, an old radio played country songs while I sorted papers until almost midnight. I found handwritten reminders tucked into folders. Call Rick, renew insurance, order bearings, small pieces of an ordinary life. Then one Thursday, an envelope slipped from an old green binder onto the floor. My name was written across it in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. My hands began to shake. I was not ready to open it. I put it back, closed the binder, and carried it into the house. Some things deserve a clear mind, and I had learned not to open important things after midnight. The next morning, I made coffee in Daniel's favorite navy blue mug, though he was not there to drink it. Outside, our maple tree had begun dropping orange leaves over the driveway. Daniel always complained about raking them, then spent the entire afternoon doing it anyway. The memory made me smile. A few days later, Linda knocked before breakfast. "You need to come outside." Across the street, Eleanor stood with two contractors. One had a clipboard, and the other used a laser tape to measure my backyard. I crossed the lawn. "Good morning, Eleanor." She barely looked at me. "Oh, Margaret." She pointed toward Daniel's vegetable garden. "I will probably remove all this." I looked at the raised beds Daniel had built by hand during his first summer of retirement. "They are difficult to maintain," she continued. "I prefer open landscaping." I nodded. "I am sure you do." She seemed disappointed that I did not argue. By Friday, another rumor had spread. Eleanor had supposedly ordered new living room furniture. Linda called. "You will never believe this." "I probably will. She is telling everyone she will move in before Thanksgiving." I stirred chicken soup while holding the phone against my shoulder. "That is ambitious. Why are you so calm?" "I am not calm. You sound calm." I looked out the window. "I have stopped wasting energy trying to control what other people say." Linda paused. "I wish I could do that." "So do I." Saturday brought 3 longtime Harper Precision employees to my door with donuts from Texas Donuts in Centerville. Rick came with them. "We are checking on you," he said awkwardly. "With maple bars?" "Best medicine we could think of." We spent nearly an hour around my kitchen table talking about football, rising prices, aching knees, and the shop's new coffee machine. It felt wonderfully ordinary. Then Rick cleared his throat. "Eleanor visited the factory yesterday. She introduced herself as the future owner." My stomach tightened. "What else?" "She asked for a list of employees over 60. The room went silent. Carl, one of the machinists, folded his hands. "She said younger workers are cheaper." After a long pause, Rick said, "Colonel Harper would never treat people that way." "No, he would not." Carl patted my hand. "We do not care who owns the company. We care who leads it." After they left, I kept thinking about that word. Leadership. Daniel used it constantly. Not authority, not power. Leadership. That evening I placed the green binder on the dining room table. The envelope remained inside. On the front, Daniel had written, "Margaret, open this when the time feels right." I broke the seal. Inside was a 3-page handwritten letter. Daniel had never been a man for speeches. He would rather repair a fence than discuss his feelings. So seeing so much of his handwriting tightened my chest. The first line stopped me. "My darling Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and knowing my mother, she is probably already making your life harder than it needs to be." Despite everything, I laughed into the empty room. "Still making jokes," I whispered. He began with ordinary reminders. "Change the furnace filter every fall because I always forgot. Do not let anyone convince me to replace his old pickup because it still had another 100,000 miles in it." Then the letter became serious. "You know me well enough to understand that I never walked into an operation without preparing an exit plan. Business is not much different." Even after 12 years of retirement, he still thought like an officer. The next paragraph caught my attention. "Michael knows where the important papers are. If something feels wrong, ask him to check the blue estate binder, not the green one." I remembered a blue 3-ring binder on the lowest shelf beneath boxes of tax records. I returned to the workshop, found it under a thin layer of dust, carried it to the workbench, and opened it. Inside were trust documents, corporate records, and legal correspondence dating back almost 8 years. Most of the legal language meant little to me, but one page carried a yellow sticky note. "Michael, review every 5 years." Why had he never mentioned this? I called immediately. 20 minutes later, Michael sat at my dining room table with the binder open before him. He adjusted his glasses and turned the pages while the grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. 5 minutes passed. then 10. His expression shifted from confusion to curiosity and then disbelief. He checked one document, another, then returned to the first. "No," he whispered to himself. "What is it?" I asked. He kept reading, his fingers trembling. When he reached the final page, he removed his glasses. "Margaret, Daniel did not hide anything. He documented everything exactly as he should have." "What does that mean?" Michael tapped the binder. "It means Harper Precision may not belong to Daniel's probate estate." I stared at him. "What? And if I am reading this correctly, neither does your house." We sat in silence while a school bus passed outside and a lawnmower started down the street. At last I said, "So Eleanor may have spent a month fighting over property that is not part of the estate." Michael nodded. "I need to verify every document. But if these records are valid, and they appear to be, the final hearing will unfold very differently than anyone expects." For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I was not thinking about revenge. I remembered the quiet smile he wore whenever someone underestimated him. The final probate hearing was scheduled for 9 on a cold Tuesday morning at the Fairfax County Courthouse. I barely slept. I was not afraid of Eleanor. I was afraid of hope. After weeks of believing everything was slipping away, I suddenly had reason to believe Daniel had protected us. If that hope proved false, the fall would hurt twice as much. At 6:30, I made scrambled eggs I could not eat and watched my coffee grow cold. Michael had called the night before. I verified every document. They are legitimate. But we still have to let the process unfold. "You are being mysterious," he chuckled. "I learned from your husband." That made me smile. The hallway outside Probate Courtroom 3 was already crowded when I arrived. Neighbors from Fairfax stood beside retired veterans from Daniel's American Legion post. Rick and several Harper Precision employees had taken the morning off. Linda carried a travel mug reading, "World's Okayest Neighbor." She hugged me. "You look calm." "I have had practice." She smiled. "I know that look. It is the one you get when you have made peace with whatever happens." I wished she were right. Inside, Eleanor looked as though she were attending an awards banquet. She wore a cream designer suit, pearls, and the smile that had widened every week since Daniel's funeral. Her attorney, Charles Benton, arranged labeled folders across counsel table. Eleanor approached me. "I hope there are no hard feelings, Margaret. There should have been fewer hard words." She laughed lightly. "This is simply business." I shook my head. "It stopped being business the day we buried your son." Her smile disappeared for one brief second. Judge Helen Whitaker entered at 9. After the formalities, Charles presented Eleanor's claims with polished confidence, speaking of legacy, bloodline, generational ownership, and responsibility. Then Michael stood. His opening lasted less than 2 minutes. "We have no objection to the petition as it relates to assets legally belonging to the probate estate." Confusion moved through the room. Charles smiled, convinced we had surrendered. One document after another was placed before me. Michael slid each page across the table. "Do you understand what you are signing?" "I do." I signed every one. The scratch of my pen echoed through the quiet courtroom. Eleanor leaned back and folded her hands. She believed she had won. When the last page reached me, Michael met my eyes. "Any questions?" "I trust my husband." I signed. A murmur spread through the gallery. Someone whispered that I had given up. Charles closed his briefcase with satisfaction, and Eleanor smiled triumphantly. Judge Whitaker gathered the signed papers, read for almost a minute, then closed the file, removed her glasses, and looked at Charles. "Counselor, before I rule, I have one question." The courtroom became so silent I heard the courthouse clock strike 10. Judge Whitaker rested her hands on the file. "Did you verify that every asset listed in your petition is actually part of Colonel Harper's probate estate?" Charles stood. "Yes, Your Honor." She opened a smaller folder beneath the court file and studied several pages. "Are you certain?" For the first time, he looked unsure. He glanced at Eleanor, who nodded confidently. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge removed her glasses. "Interesting." Michael remained still, his hands folded. "Mr. Benton, Were you aware that Harper Precision Manufacturing was transferred into the Harper Legacy Trust more than 7 years ago? Charles blinked. I am sorry? The Harper Legacy Trust, she repeated. He opened a binder and flipped through it, then another, moving faster as he found nothing. Eleanor leaned toward him. What is she talking about? He did not answer. Judge Whitaker continued. Were you aware that the residence on Willow Creek Drive was conveyed into the same trust? My heart pounded. Charles said, Your Honor, those documents were never presented during discovery. Michael stood. They were recorded with Fairfax County in 2018. He gave a certified copy to the clerk. The recording information is attached. Judge Whitaker compared it with the papers before her and nodded. They match. A murmur rolled through the room. Rick stared at me. Linda covered her mouth, and even Frank looked shocked. Eleanor seized Charles's arm. What is this? He swallowed. I do not know. You said everything was part of the estate. That is what the petition indicated. Michael said calmly. The petition relied on outdated ownership records. Judge Whitaker asked Charles whether he had independently verified title before seeking distribution. He hesitated. I relied on information from my client. The judge made a note. Mrs. Harper, this court cannot distribute property not legally owned by the estate. Eleanor's smile vanished. She looked at the judge, at Charles, and then at me. For the first time since the funeral, she looked frightened. I wish I could say I enjoyed it. Mostly, I felt tired. One courtroom moment could not erase weeks of gossip, sleepless nights, strangers discussing my marriage, and employees fearing for their jobs. Daniel once told me while we repainted the porch, truth does not always arrive first. Sometimes it takes the long road. In that silence, I knew the truth had finally caught up. No one left, not the employees, neighbors, veterans, or reporters who had entered after hearing about a dispute involving a respected local business. Judge Whitaker turned to Michael. Explain the Harper Legacy Trust for the record. Michael picked up Daniel's blue binder. Colonel Daniel Harper established the trust in June 2018. It was reviewed, amended when necessary, and properly recorded with Fairfax County. The trust became the legal owner of Harper Precision Manufacturing. Charles objected that Margaret Harper should still control it. Michael shook his head. The trust has 3 co-trustees. Judge Whitaker read the names. Margaret Harper, Richard Coleman, and the Veterans Community Foundation of Northern Virginia. Rick nearly rose from his chair. Me? He whispered. I nodded. I had not known either. Michael continued. All 3 trustees must approve before the company can be sold, dissolved, or relocated. Charles frowned. So Mrs. Harper cannot simply sell it? No one can unless Colonel Harper's conditions are met. The judge asked what those conditions were. Michael smiled. The company must remain in Northern Virginia. It must maintain its veteran hiring program, and at least 80% of its full-time employees must be retained during any ownership transition. Relieved looks passed among the employees. Frank whispered, "That is Dan." Carl exhaled so loudly that several people laughed. Even the judge smiled. Colonel Harper intended to protect both the business and its people. Exactly, Your Honor. Eleanor leaned toward Charles. There has to be something. He answered carefully. The trust appears valid. Appears? I need to review it further. Judge Whitaker said, This court cannot disregard properly executed trust documents. Eleanor shook her head. My son would never cut me out. Michael replied respectfully. He did not. The trust grants Mrs. Eleanor Harper a one-time distribution of $50,000. Eleanor blinked. $50,000? Michael nodded. Colonel Harper also attached a personal letter explaining why. The judge asked to see it. She read the letter silently. When she finished, her expression softened. I will not read this aloud. It was clearly intended to remain private. But Colonel Harper gave considerable thought to ensuring his family, employees, and community were cared for after his death. The room was silent, but the silence now felt peaceful. Judge Whitaker signed the orders. The claims seeking ownership of Harper Precision Manufacturing and the residence on Willow Creek Drive are denied. Those assets are not part of the probate estate. Her gavel struck once. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. After the hearing, no one rushed out. Eleanor remained seated, staring at the table. She did not cry. Charles packed his files without speaking. Michael gathered ours. "Are you all right?" "I think so. You do not sound convinced." I smiled faintly. "I carried this weight for weeks. It feels strange not to have it." He understood. Some victories do not make you celebrate. They simply let you breathe again. Outside, the autumn air felt colder. Reporters gathered near the courthouse steps. One asked Eleanor for a comment. She looked at Charles, and he shook his head. Another asked whether she knew the company was not part of the estate. A third asked what would happen to Harper Precision. Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time I knew her, she had nothing to say. The reporters turned to me. A young woman asked how I felt after a hearing many expected to become a long battle. "Relieved," I answered. "Do you consider this a victory?" I looked across the parking lot at Rick, Carl, Melissa from accounting, Tom from shipping, and the others Daniel had trusted. "I think my husband would be happy." "And your mother-in-law?" "I truly hope she finds peace." Michael smiled slightly. It was not the answer anyone expected. Rick caught us near the parking garage. He looked like a man who had survived a tornado. "I cannot believe Colonel Harper made me a trustee." "Neither can I," he laughed. The first thing everyone asked was whether we were keeping our jobs. I told them yes. Then he grew serious. "Margaret, thank you for never treating us as though we were only employees." My throat tightened. "Daniel taught me that." Rick shook his head. "He showed you. You chose to live it." The following Monday, I returned to Harper Precision. The mood had changed completely. Machines hummed, forklifts crossed the warehouse, donuts sat in the break room, and fresh coffee filled the air. Carl brought me a cardboard box from Daniel's office. Inside were handwritten birthday cards, retirement congratulations, and notes thanking employees for staying late during snowstorms. One unmailed envelope was addressed, "To whoever leads this company after me." Rick told me to read it. Daniel had written one sentence: "Take care of the people, and the business will take care of itself." I smiled. That sounds exactly like him. Rick laughed. Nobody ever won an argument with the Colonel. We both laughed for the first time since his funeral, and this time, it did not hurt. It felt as though Daniel was still leading us in a different way. Winter arrived quietly. By December, the maple tree had dropped its last leaf, and the cold Fairfax mornings made me pull my coat tighter. Life did not become perfect. There were insurance forms, meetings with accountants, and more trust paperwork than I had imagined. Every Tuesday, Rick and I met in Daniel's old office to review company reports. At first, sitting behind his desk felt wrong. Eventually, I understood that I was not replacing him. I was protecting what he built. The employees stopped fearing for their jobs and began bringing ideas. Someone wanted to improve the break room. Someone else proposed expanding the apprenticeship program for veterans returning to civilian life. By spring, we welcomed 3 apprentices. One had served in Afghanistan. Another had spent 20 years in the Navy. The youngest had left the Army after 8 years as a mechanic. Watching them in the shop reminded me of Daniel. He believed experience should be passed on, not locked away. A few weeks before Memorial Day, a letter arrived from Eleanor. I stared at it for 10 minutes before opening it. There was no lawyer, demand, or accusation, only a short note. "Margaret, I spent so much time trying to hold on to what Daniel owned that I forgot to appreciate who he was. I cannot change what happened. I am sorry for the pain I caused you." She offered no excuse and asked for nothing. I folded the letter and placed it in the blue binder that had changed everything. Some apologies do not erase the past, but they can stop bitterness from following you into the future. On Memorial Day morning, I drove to Arlington National Cemetery with fresh white roses. Rows of marble headstones stretched beyond sight. I found Daniel's grave without a map. I always could. I knelt, brushed leaves from the stone, and placed the flowers beside it. For a while, I stood there without speeches or tears, feeling only gratitude. "I finally understand," I said. "You were not protecting the money. You were protecting the people." A breeze moved through the trees. That had always been Daniel's mission. The house was never merely a house, and the company was never merely a business. They were places where people built lives, formed friendships, and found stability. His greatest legacy was not measured in dollars, but in the people still standing because he cared enough to prepare. As I walked back toward the parking lot, I realized I no longer wanted revenge. Justice had already done its work. What remained was peace, and after everything, peace felt like the greatest inheritance of all. If this story reminded you that kindness, patience, and integrity can outlast greed, I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope you will join me again for another story. The end.